the capture in the dark. The metal cell's walls were frigid. The air within was tiny lights blinked above, but they provided no warmth. They were grey, sleek, and silent. A tiny extraterrestrial girl sat with her knees to her chest in the corner of the jail. Her name was Laura, and she had slender fingers, big glowing eyes, and vivid green skin. She shuddered in terror since she had heard horrible tales about people. They confined them in cages with aliens from weak planets. Some claimed they ate them, while others claimed that they employed them in torturous experiments. Her mother had always muttered, "Never trust a human." However, Lara was now alone herself when her escape pod landed on an unidentified planet, was taken aboard a human scout ship, and she now waited in this cage for LRA halted as the door hissed, and a shadow emerged on the other side, pain, waiting for death. It had 2 arms and 2 legs and was tall. Human. He entered the room gradually, his feet tapping the metal. "Please don't eat me," she pleaded, pressing herself farther into the corner of the floor. The person paused and tilted his head, whispering. He was exhausted and had short black hair. There was no hatred or hunger in his eyes, despite the fact that he was wearing a uniform and had a significant scar along his jaw. He said in a low voice, "You're awake." But Lara didn't understand him. However, he didn't sound angry, so she remained silent and observed him. Without attempting to access the cell, the human knelt down in front of it, placed something on the floor, and moved it toward her. It was a little box. The top opened, revealing water and a soft food. Bar LRA remained in place, saying, "It's okay." Safe. Safe, she didn't trust him. This was a ruse. She had witnessed human behavior. The human side of the stories is when they first smiled before hurting you. He briefly appeared worn out as he sat on the floor outside the jail. He didn't act like a monster because he was lonely. Why did Lara stare at the food? She had not eaten in more than a day, so her stomach rumbled. However, what if it was poisoned? She shook her head and turned away. A few minutes later, the person got up and walked away, the food close to her cell, and left. The door hissed shut once more, but Lara remained inside. She stayed in the corner for a while without touching the food. The following time, when the human returned, he had another object in his hands that appeared to be a small silver instrument. With a bright end, Lara was terrified. She thought it was a needle. She slid back, her eyes wide with horror. The human halted when he saw how afraid she was. Instead of approaching, he turned the tool over himself and came into contact with a tiny cut on his arm. The instrument sparkled, and the cut started to heal, and Lara observed in shock that he wasn't. He pointed slowly at her arm, intending to use it to harm her. She looked down there. Was a bloody, swelling wound from the collision. The person stepped forward and displayed the tool once more, and Lara shook her head and retreated, her body shaking as she recalled her mother's words. Never the human didn't push. Instead, he nodded and set the instrument down on the ground. Then he walked out again. This happened again the next day. He brought water and food, and occasionally tools. He never pushed her, yelled at her, or made fun of her. Observed, waited. One night, a huge noise, something heavy, reverberated throughout the ship. LRA sat up, her heart racing, as the lights flickered and a red alert flashed through the outside wall. The human rushed into the room as the door flew open, glancing at her and yelling. He opened the cage, and LRA shouted. She didn't understand what he was saying, but she could tell he was afraid. She believed it was over when he covered her head, but instead of grabbing her, he seized the instrument and faced the door, his body positioned between her and the danger. A powerful growl shook the floor outside, but he wasn't the threat. He was protecting her. Lara looked up and saw that something worse than a person was on the ship. A man with a weapon in his hand and blood streaming from a wound on his cheek stood tall, glanced at her for barely a second, "Stay down," he murmured. Then he hurried, for the Elra looked after him, perplexed and somewhat less terrified for the first time. The alien ship had been struck, and there was a harsh and odd hush after the impact, with dread in her eyes and kindness in his hands. By something strong, and whatever it desired, LRA sat motionless in the shadowy nook. The lights outside her cell flickered, and the alarms blinked. Red something made slow, deep scratches on the ship's exterior walls that resembled claws on metal. The door was even scarier since, although she didn't know what the thing was, she knew it wasn't human. Opened, the man entered, breathing heavily, and his uniform was torn, blood on his sleeve. He stared intently into her eyes and remained silent. LRA drew away as soon as he unlocked her cell, her heart pounding rapidly, struck the rear wall and cried out, "This was it!" The stories forewarned of the monster's arrival would take her, but instead of doing so, he didn't even enter the cage. He dropped a soft material close to the entrance. It was his own jacket. He glanced at it. He pointed to it and said, "Hide under this," in a calm yet quick voice. The tone was clear to her, even though she didn't understand the words. Protective rather than harsh. And then the sound came back louder. The ship trembled, once again as the metal tore closer. He turned abruptly and yelled into Deck 4. "We have a breach." No response. His jaw tensed, a tiny gadget on his wrist. He briefly appeared to want to say something more before the lights completely went out. As he turned back to LRA, LRA gasped in the darkness as the ship moaned under strain. Something had touched down on the above them. A new sound, wet, animal-like breathing, came from the roof. A human crouched next to the cage and carefully inserted a little gadget beneath the bars. It glowed a gentle blue hologram. Emerged, revealing a small extraterrestrial standing next to a basic human figure. He then gestured to his side, then to her, and last to the door, which he wanted her to follow him. Before she could make a decision, the hallway door slammed. The panel bowed inward, causing a large dent in that their time was running out. The human pulled out a short weapon, something between taking a step forward. He shielded himself by pointing a torch and a blade at the entrance. LRA was unable to do anything but stare at her. He wasn't running or assaulting her, defending her. When the door exploded, the first smells were dead air and burned metal. A large, armor-like creature with long arms, fiery eyes, and an odd emblem on its body marched into the frame. Its mouth extended sideways to reveal rows, and its claws raked the floor. LRA shrieked in horror as she saw a harvester, her planet's biggest nightmare, with sharp, greasy teeth. Something between them screamed, "Not human, not beast!" The human didn't recoil. Charged. The human moved quickly as the room burst into noise and flashing lights. As it collided with the creature's claws, the harvester roared, swiped, and missed, sending sparks shooting off the blade. The person was struck in the side, yet he didn't always wobble and spill real blood. He repeatedly jumped back up after falling and continued to stand between the LRA and the however. He wasn't just battling, he was risking everything for her at that very time. Something inside her changed. She was now a protector rather than a monster. The harvester eventually collapsed, scorching from the edge of the blade. The man went to one knee, gasping for air, and his weapon clattered. LRA cautiously crawled out of the cage and picked up the shining instrument before dropping it on the ground. She approached him despite her shaking hands, and his arm was slashed. She leaned forward and applied the gadget to his wound, which shone softly as the bleeding stopped. Slowed, his eyelids slightly opened, and he saw her face for the first moment. "You helped me," he murmured, and she gave him a single nod before, in shock, she spoke the human word, no more than a whisper. "Safe." His eyes became wide and he grinned, but before he could continue, the ship's red siren sounded once more. Several harvesters flashed, and a fresh voice sounded from the wall speaker. Found that hull damage was growing, and the person moaned, "Life support is failing." Good. He held his side, and stood carefully, looked at her, and then gestured to the side. They had to sprint down the hallway, and he didn't have to say anything for her to understand. They had to work together to live because the monster wasn't him. It was coming. Creature's metal moaned as if it were alive, and the corridor trembled. The floor pulsed beneath their feet as pipes exploded on the ceiling, and something massive thudded repeatedly. Red warning lights blinked in all directions, streaming into the air. As he hobbled along, orange-red Jack the human gripped his side. His mouth was clenched, and his outfit was marred by blood. Lara trailed behind him in agony, holding on to the luminous instrument he had previously used to assist her as they ran, but not quickly enough. A harsh, wet clicking sound resonated behind them. "Not boots, claws, move," Jack replied, guiding her toward a metal corridor. Side door. She recognized the fear in his voice, but she didn't understand the words. Eyes. They snuck inside, and Jack bolted the door after slamming it. He fell to his knees, coughing violently, and LRA looked at him, uncertain of what to do. He gently moved her hand away as she reached for the first aid kit once more, saying, "Not." Between breaths he added, "Now, we don't have time." Elra glanced around the room. It was dim, with odd boxes and flickering panels. A round window revealed a dark sky with broken stars, and an object drifting in the distance. Jack murmured, "They followed us. Void. Something huge." Elra blinked. "What did it imply, Jack? They weren't after you. They were after me." Leaned against the wall and gazed at her. "I don't blame you for believing that we are monsters, but the things the true monsters are, the harvesters." LRA remained silent, her mouth parched, but her Jack pointed to the window outside as his fingers clenched on the instrument. The harvester. Spacecraft lingered in the shadow of a broken moon, its dark metal arms folded like wings. Its engines pulsed with a red light that was different from the glow of human ships. Jack whispered softly, "We fought them years ago, looking alive. Humans. Attempted to halt, he pulled a device, and some of us died, some gave up, and some sold us out," from his belt, and set it down on the table. A little light flickered, followed by a hologram. Flickering, fractured visuals, human ships bursting, harvesters, and battles tearing through cities, followed by even more horrifying pictures of children from other planets. The TV displayed a tall, imprisoned, scanned, branded LRA who noticed her own people and was friendly. A harvester shoved a small green youngster into a box, and LRA took a deep breath. She was trembling because she recognized that face from her dreams. It wasn't just any child, though. It was her. Jack remarked that they always allow some species to flourish while observing your planet. Then they took LRA, who stared at him and said, "Why did Jack meet her?" His voice broke the silence that hovered between them for a moment, "Because no one saved mine." After a while, the wall behind them bowed inward and the metal split. Jack swore under his breath as he cut through, took a metal case off the shelf, threw it to the ground, and pulled 2 costumes were brought out, one little and one human-sized. He threw the small suit to the LRA and said, "Put it quickly," he remarked. "We're leaving the ship." The LRA examined her suit. She had never worn anything similar, but she was certain that danger was imminent. They nodded as they scurried through a side hatch and into a lengthy vent in the walls. Jack glanced at her as something blasted behind them, sounding like screaming and metal tearing. "They don't want you alive," he muttered, "and they don't want me," as they crawled. Speaking. "Why?" LRA inquired quietly, and Jack took a moment to respond. "Because we recognize who they truly are." They arrived at a little launch bay, cracked, glass crunching beneath their feet, and Jack opened and "Go," he urged, gesturing for her to enter the emergency pod. "I'll hold them." LRA looked at him and replied, "No, not again. Together, Jack." Astonishedly glanced at her, then slowly grinned. "Okay." Together, they climbed into Jack, turned on the controls, and the pod rocked, separated, and flew away from as they took off. LRA peered through the glass of the harvesting ship, just as something burst behind them. Jack nodded as she turned to face them and said, "They're coming." And then we left. Where they are unable to follow her, Jack grinned once more, this time with fatigue and hopeful home. The escape pod swung through space faster. "Why did you save me?" than any wind LRA had ever felt. Stars blurred past. The only sound inside was Jack's heavy breathing, and the gentle hum of the pod's engines caused him pain, and his blood seeped into the flying seat. LRA, who had never flown or left her world before, sat next to him in the emergency suit, her hands quivering. She saw death, but it was all behind her now, and a person was seated beside her, who ought to have been her adversary. But instead, he protected her and shed blood for her. "Why?" Jack coughed and slowly opened his eyes. "You okay?" he muttered. She gave a reluctant nod, then said the words that had been stuck in her mouth the entire time. "Why did you save me?" After staring at her for a while, he grinned, since someone ought to have saved. Lyra didn't fully comprehend those words, yet they struck me more forcefully than any weapon. However, she could sense the melancholy in his voice. The same pain she had been carrying for the sorrow of witnessing your people disappear into hiding as your world. A caution signal appeared on the control panel, and the pod beeped, saying, "We're heading down," Jack said in a painfully tight voice. "Hold on," the pod whirred. Once more quickly, and outside a tiny planet appeared. It was primarily long mountain chains, and a forest with silver rivers are unknown, unlabeled, and concealed. LRA shrieked, Jack grimaced, and they smashed through the atmosphere like a falling star. His teeth, followed by metal screeching, branches snapping, and the pod sliding. Smoke filled the air as it passed through dense trees and came to a sudden stop, knocking them both forward. Jack remained motionless while the emergency lights flickered, and Lyra pushed herself up on her arms. Jack trembled and murmured, "No answer," with his head cocked to the side and his eyes closed. She crawled over to Jack and put her fingers to his chest. He was breathing heavily, but was still alive. She then surveyed the pod. The first aid kit was buried beneath fragments of the broken and cracked items. She dragged it out of the ceiling, opening it with trembling little hands as she recalled. She imitated his actions by applying the illuminating instrument to his wounds one by one, just as he had done with the tool on her arm. He moaned and opened, his eyes gradually. "You're still here," he said. "Yes." Jack grinned quietly as she said, "You protect me, I protect you. Deal." They slept within the pod for hours as the odd planet shifted. Purple moonlight rose in the sky into the night, illuminating the fractured glass. LRA sat next to Jack, observing him as he slept, and reflecting about her mother's tales of how people destroyed towns, abducted children, and were unable to be trusted. Yet he was wounded after giving her food, water, and warmth, because he decided to keep her safe. The following morning, Jack, who were the true monsters, could barely walk again. They exited the pod and went into the forest, where the air had an odd fragrance of dust and wetness. Everything glistened in silver mist as birds sang in the treetops, but they weren't by themselves. Two eyes observed them, little, inquisitive, non-human. Harvester. At first, Lara sensed another extraterrestrial. By the way the air altered the way the birds fell silent, she spun quickly, and something emerged. Jack, who was short and wearing odd robes, gently raised his hand while holding a staff. The alien squinted before tapping its staff on the ground, saying, "We're not here to fight." LRA grasped Jack's arm and said, "Are they in danger?" As other figures, perhaps 10 or 12, appeared on the ground, all of them silent and observing. Jack remained silent, his gaze fixed on their armored commander, who was the largest. Composed of bones and vines, the leader moved forward, glanced at Jack, and then at Elra, and spoke in a rich, resonant voice. Voice Jack was unable to comprehend, but LRA was able to do so because it was her native tongue. The leader said, Why are you with a human? And Lura moved forward. He saved me, she murmured, trembling. He fought the monsters. The leader's eyes. Not him, Lura murmured quietly. He bled for me. Humans are monsters. Could have abandoned me, but he didn't. Silence. The commander then turned back to face Jack. Prove it, he said before they could inquire as to why the ground trembled. A loud, deep growl erupted from the trees. Trees broke in the distance, and the tribe dispersed as something enormous approached. Even the leader retreated when Jack grabbed LRA's hand and said, "Run!" She trembled. Her head. No stand. A huge beast emerged from the darkness, taller than any tree, with 6 legs, 4 red, and plates of black armor. LRA stepped in front of Jack's eyes as his hold on the shattered sword intensified, she told him. Not this time. And the girl who had before pleaded for forgiveness now stood. A link formed in fire. The monster roared like a shield, and Lara raged back. The ancient beast was not only large, but it also had black metal plates that clicked as it. The earth trembled with every stride. Branches fell, birds disappeared, and its fiery eyes burned through the dense woodland mist. The tribe that had encircled Jack and Lura was now motionless in a broad circle. Hands trembling, weapons raised, they had dubbed it the Death God. And now it was focusing on the young girl who dared to stand in front of the knees of a human LRA. Trembled, but Jack remained motionless and prepared her weapon behind her. With blood on his cheeks, he muttered, "We can still run." Lura replied, "We don't." Jack glanced at her, this little extraterrestrial who had once pleaded not to run. The tribe's leader lifted his staff and said, "This is the test if your bond is to be eaten now," speaking with a warrior's passion. "Is real, then live. Then stop talking." The beast screamed, rattling the treetops. LRA grabbed Jack's wrist as he charged forward, saying, "Wait, I hear it." "Hear what?" Jack inquired. She briefly closed her eyes. Her face was free of fear. It was in agony. The beast was moving too quickly for its size. Its side armor was damaged, its front legs slid a little, and there were deep scars running across its neck. It was in pain, not hunting, and Jack didn't drop his Elra murmured quietly. "It's not attacking us," and Blade asked, "What are you saying?" The beast's roar changed to a low choking sound as it smacked into the ground a few feet away from them, pleading for assistance. Dust exploded all around them, trees cracked, and the noise swayed before collapsing. Jack looked on in exhaustion as the beast struck the ground, its breathing heavy and slow. The tribe moved ahead, one step at a time, in shock at what had just transpired, yelled cautions, but she disregarded them. She arrived near the creature's head. A huge eye flashed at her, and she heard a sound. Not words, not a voice. Simply experiencing pain, anxiety, and hope. It was slowly, while she was dying, she extended her hand and touched the area of its armor that was cracked. A gentle glow emerged as glowing veins pulsed around the wounds and traveled along the armor. "Living," she said. "It's not a deity. Guardian." Jack moved closer behind her. "How do you know?" she asked, pointing at Jack's eyes, said, "These are from harvesters." Lura nodded as if they hunted everything, and the clan stood in shock. They watched in quiet, unable to comprehend, and then the leader spoke once more. "The Death God knew. I was like it, so you appeased it without using any weapons," LRA said. Broken, hunted, and used. The tribe collapsed to their Jack's knees, remained motionless and bewildered. The leader glanced up at LRA and said, "You passed the exam. You are now bonded." "Bonded?" Jack said, and the commander gave a nod. When one person sacrifices themselves for another, when one protects the other, when one recognizes the suffering without using words, which is the sacred link Jack saw in LRA. The pain between them finally made sense as Lyra gazed at him. They had bled. They had put their faith in something more powerful than fear. "What does it mean?" Jack said. "No one can separate you now," the leader declared. And as night fell, the tribe constructed. They fed the dead animal, unusual herbs, and sang old songs around the campfire. Songs. As Jack sat next to LRA, he observed her conversing with the creatures that had previously seen. He grinned at her as a stranger, and she turned to face him, saying, "You are not what I thought." And he said, "You're much more than I imagined." All they needed was a fire between them and a world that was waiting to be rewritten. But a chilly sound reverberated far away from the bright light in the woodland. There are scores of them, and through the woods, metal feet murmur in the darkness. The station's truth fog grew in the forest, and harvesters had discovered them once more. Through the night, the tribe sang like steam from a wounded globe. Once dreaded as a death god, the beast now lay close to the fire, its chest rising. Elora sat next to Jack slowly, her fingers following the odd patterns on the armor of the creature. But she sensed something was amiss from a distance. His eyes blinked infrequently as he watched Jack polish his blade close to the fire. "They're close," he muttered, looking at Lura. His body was healing slowly, but his mind remained as keen as the sword in his palm. He looked toward the trees and asked, "How do you know?" "Because it's quiet too. Silent, without wind, insects, or birds." The tribe's leader came over, holding an ancient, blinking, spherical metal object. "Lights. In the jungle, our scouts spotted machines." He said, "Black armor, no sound, Jack." Harvester LRA's stomach went cold as they stood, and the boss nodded, marched in the direction of the former station. A station Jack questioned in the black night sky, between the tree branches, the leader gestured upward with a gentle. They believed it to be an old, abandoned human space station, with a blinking light hovering among the stars. LRA felt drawn to the location where the leader claimed to have power and knowledge. Just as though the truth she required was concealed there, waiting for her. "We have to leave," she said, and Jack glanced at her. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I believe." The tribe assisted them in preparing a ship that was hidden up there, and somebody up there knows me. Vessel beneath an ancient tree's roots that had been preserved by time and secrecy as it ascended. LRA sat by the window, gazing at the station. Closer through the clouds, the station was now round and grey, covered in dust and scars, it appeared to be sleeping. But as they approached, lights gradually flicked on. Jack stated, "It's waking me up like an eye-opening." The ship made contact with the airlock. There was silence inside as the doors opened with a hiss and dust hung in the air like little ghosts. Jack's ancient charts and Lara's odd intuition led them through the corridors until they came to a sizable central chamber, a circular space with screens that flickered and walls covered in ancient symbols. A voice from above brought a soft, broken woman to life. Verified identification. "Welcome, LRA." Jack froze. "What? Did it just say LRA?" I was perplexed, wondering how it knew my name. A holographic rose that displayed LRA's face, her mother's face, and a line of names, a lineage from her species, each identified by a single title. They conducted experiments on your people, LRA, and Project Guardian. Jack moved closer. The AI voice said, "It wasn't just an experiment," as she felt her legs weaken. Stated once more, "Your DNA is the key to both mending and fostering cross-cultural bonds." "Bonding between species?" Jack inquired, as the screen displayed pictures of humans and aliens engaged in combat. Together, supporting and rescuing one another, and always the one who connected. "You're not just any survivor," Jack stated quietly, referring to the person as LRA. LRA retreated and said, "You were born to bring us together. I didn't choose that." Perhaps the station trembled as he responded, "Not." "Whoa, but you're doing it anyway." Jack pulled his alarm as it yelled, "Breach detected. Sector 4. Hostile units inbound." Blade LRA's eyes widened as she murmured, "They're here." The screens shifted to reveal black metal, sharp claws, fiery eyes, and harvesters storming the lowest deck. But something was different this time. Instead of hunting her, they were defending something, and Jack was the first to discover it. LRA touched the map to reveal a secret compartment beneath the core that was guarding the lower chamber. The screen flickered once more. "The last memory. File is ready. Jack, proceed with caution." Examining her, they fled since whatever they were concealing was the reason you were pursued. Past damaged machinery and down flaming hallways, the harvesters struck, but LRA. The machines paused and stared as she spoke. Something in her blood had a peculiar pulse. Bewildered, she arrived at the chamber door and touched it. It opened, revealing a glass tube with a clone of her within that is not alive, but nearly Jack. The AI voice said as they stepped next to her, "They were trying to make more of you. Last but not least, your mother concealed you while the others escaped. You are LRA's heart, even though you were never meant to live." Seemed clear but heavy, and she whispered, "What's that, Jack?" "Then I'll do what they feared." Questioned, "I'll make sure we're not alone anymore." Then, there was a crash behind them, and a taller figure appeared in the doorway. More than any harvester with a black smoke cover, its voice pierced the atmosphere. "She is not your human." "To us," Jack said, lifting his sword, and Laura moved to stand next to him. "No," she said, echoing across the heavens. "I don't belong to anyone." The room trembled with tension, and something beyond fear stood in the doorway. The Harvester commander, clad in armor and smoke, fixed its bright red eyes on like a predator fetching its prey. LRA declared, "She belongs to us." Once more, Jack moved in front of her, blade raised, his voice as harsh as shards of glass. His hands were dry with blood, and he was about to fall, but not before struggling. "Today," he murmured softly, "never again." And LRA stepped next to him. The commander came up and said, "You were created for a single purpose, child, to connect, to control, and serve. And now you will fulfill your mission." Lyra gazed back at her long-gone worry. "You call it?" She explained, "I call it chains," and the glass tube behind them. A reminder of what she could do, the clone's replica drifted lifelessly. She could have been merely another slave's instrument, but she had made her own decision. She had yelled in the face of monsters, bled next to a human, and now Jack lifted his weapon, and we fought, and she would complete what her mother had begun. The Harvester commander lifted its arm and, from the LRA, nodded. "We fight." 3 shadowy machines with venomous spreading blades rushed in, and the battle started instantly. Jack. He dodged a blow, but charged first, his blades slamming into metal and sending sparks flying. They were powerful, and Elora moved like lightning, thanks to her diminutive size. Sneaking past their swings, she took advantage of the surroundings by flipping and jumping over pipes. Light was blasted into their senses from behind panels, but the commander was different. Stronger and smarter, it sprang at LRA, slamming at her with such power that she crashed into Jack, yelled at the wall, but he was unable to get to her in time. The commander stood over her, growling, "You are not special." LRA coughed blood in her mouth, but her eyes heated. "You were made by mistake," she muttered. "Bright mistakes change the world," before putting her hand on the ground. When turned, on at the core, the station illuminated every screen, wall, and broken. It was the key. Alarms roared. Her blood, her voice, her existence. The station arrived and yelled, "Identity confirmed. Project Guardian fully online." Jack sensed the change as defense drones fell from the ceiling and panels opened to reveal long-buried weapons. "You woke it up?" "No," he replied, and LRA stood up, saying, "I became it." As the commander received the LRA's signal as the primary, the machines turned on. One by one, they attacked him. The Harvester yelled as he tried to escape, but Jack was quicker, and his sword struck the commander's center, and this time, it pierced the quiet smoke. station darkened once again. They were standing in the ancient chamber's wreckage. Encircled by Jack fell to one knee in the ashes and dying lights, gasping for air. "Is it over?" he asked. Laura gazed at Jack, the shattered glass, and her own face, which was trapped in the tube. "Not over," she replied quietly. "Just beginning." The AI was bleeding, exhausted, but alive. Returned the signal, stating that the message was delivered to every system. Connected message. Jack inquired. A screen appeared throughout the galaxy, with pictures of a young extraterrestrial girl who accompanied a human harvester, was vanquished by cooperation rather than conflict. Two species who are supposed to be afraid of one another battling alongside one another, followed by LRAs. To everyone who is being hunted, who is terrified, and who is informed that they don't belong, we are not property. We are not weak. We are not tools. The message reverberated throughout the worlds. Protectors, we are not alone. Spanning stars, enslaved people in shackles, combatants, and kids hiding. Jack stood next to her and murmured, "They'll come for us." Dark rooms, hope, hope. The final screen displayed hundreds of them. "Let them," she said. "We're not hiding anymore." Of signals from far-off planets, ships, and growing voices responding, and another child, far away, whispered while gazing up at the stars, "Perhaps they'll also save me."